next speaker is Harald Atmanspacher. He's a professor at the University of Zurich and ETH Zurich. And the title of his talk is Reality in Physics and Beyond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me this way?
Yes.
Or do you need the microphone? Because this way I can move around the room. Okay. This talk will be in English because my French is too poor to use it as a language for presentation. But one thing I took from the previous presentations actually is from you. That's the phrase that is generally ascribed to Feynman. Shut up and calculate, right?
Is it Feynman?
I think it's Feynman. I thought it was Feynman. And Bernard Espagnat certainly was one of those people in I have to admit, minority of physicists who certainly did not subscribe to that. He was interested in foundational questions much more than in engineering applications, and that is a thread that goes through all of his work, I think. The second point is that he didn't stop thinking when he reached the boundaries of physics. As you can see in his last two books, Veiled Reality and also in the Physics and Philosophy, he spent a lot of time and work thinking about deep philosophical questions and even talking about psychology, consciousness, and so on. And this finally amounts to the third point, which I wanted to make in this little introduction. This amounts to worldview issues. So I think I can make a good case that Professor Espagnat was really interested in developing a worldview, which was based in physics, of course, but which extended out of physics, and that's what this short presentation will be about. I will try to sketch out some of the points that I think one can distill from his writings and then compare them with some other issues. I mentioned this is a minority in the physics community, and I want to say that it is a minority, but it's very good company also. For instance, let me just mention three names: Hans Primas, who passed away in 2014, Abner Shimoni, the S in the CHSH, right? That's Abner Shimoni, passed away in 2015, and Hilary Putnam, the third one I want to mention, passed away just a few months ago, in March this year. So it's a very good company, and all these people had something in mind which was much bigger than a scientific kind of little picture in detail, but they were all after a grand picture. So that was the introduction. Now let me come to another introduction. I said that I will talk about Espagnat's philosophical perspective, and so I want to start with a quotation. Don't worry, this is not the end of it, it's just continuing to the last slide. It's a quotation by Bert Brecht, a German novelist in the first half of the last century. Obviously, it's a kind of classroom situation. The teacher asks the student, Sifu, what are the ultimate questions of philosophy? Sifu says, are the things outside of us for themselves, without us, or are they within us for ourselves, not without us? Teacher, which answer is the right one? No decision has been found yet. To which answer does the majority of all philosophers tend? Things are outside of us, for themselves, without us. Why did the question remain unsolved? And now the student says, the Congress that was supposed to bring the solution took place, as for the last 200 years, at the monastery of Misang, close to the Yellow River. The question was, does the Yellow River really exist, or does it only exist in the minds? During the Congress, Much snow melted in the mountains. The yellow river rose up its banks and flushed away the monastery with all the conference participants. Thank God this doesn't happen. So the proof that the things are outside of us, for themselves, without us, could not be achieved. Well, the lesson is finished. So this is obviously about one of the really deep problems in philosophy, and it's a problem in the philosophy of physics and in the philosophy of mind. As we will see, it's the problem of how the mental, the mind, and the physical, the material, if you want, are related to one another. And here I put just, still in the sense of an introduction, three different classic positions with respect to that question. One of them is interactive dualism, or substance dualism, I should say, which has its origins in Descartes, but that was, of course, simplified by the Cartesians, so Descartes' mind was much more sophisticated than what the Cartesians today would say. Idealism is the second one, that's things are only in our minds, and then what we see in the material world is derivative to this. And the third position, of course, is physicalism, which is the predominant position right now. And in the physicalist tradition, there is something that people call a naturalization program, which is the reduction of everything else that is not in physics to something physical. Right. Now, all these three classic positions have been tried out through the history of philosophy, and there were almost, I should say, something like fashion waves favoring this one and that one at different times, like idealism. In German idealism, everybody was talking idealism, and at present I would say it's very clear that the materialist, physicalist position is the mainstream position in the philosophy of mind and the philosophy of physics. Now, there is an alternative, and this alternative, you will see in a minute, is the one that Bernard d'Espagnac and other physicists, philosophers actually favored. And that alternative runs under the heading of dual aspect thinking. Different versions of it, which I will briefly indicate. Dual aspect thinking is also very old. There's a long tradition going back at least as far as to Spinoza, Schopenhauer, Bertrand Russell, and then there are other philosophers. There are quite a number of physicists who were interested and actually defended dual aspect thinking, and I will tell you what it is. Ernst Mach, one of the more prominent ones, and the persons highlighted in blue, I will go into a little bit more detail. Wolfgang Pauli, David Bohm, Harald Atmanspacher, Falkenhorn in Great Britain, Lockwood, Hans Bremer, as I mentioned before. Recently also Hermann Haken joined this company. And then, of course, in psychology and neuroscience, also an astonishingly increasing number of influential scientists subscribing to dual aspect thinking. In dual aspect thinking, neither the material nor the mental are taken as ontologically existing, ontological substances in that sense, but they are taken as aspects, as something through which our knowledge grasps that which is the actual reality behind it. And we don't know what it is, of course. It's veiled, in Espagnol's terms. So we have a kind of ground of existence which is neutral with respect to the mental-material distinction. And this kind of reality can be viewed or can be accessed through its mental or material manifestations, as people would say. So you see, this picture is dual or dualist and monist at the same time. So it tries to combine the advantages of both dualistic and monistic thinking. And of course, as always in philosophy, if you have something that brings you something, then you have to pay a price. And I will talk about both. What it brings to you and what's the price you have to pay. Okay? There are this is the end of the introduction actually. There are two different modes of dual aspect thinking which I think need to be distinguished. One of them is we call compositional, the other one we call decompositional. The compositional mode is that you have these psychophysically neutral things at the ground of existence, the ontologically existing psychophysically neutral things, and you need to compose them in one or another way to get either mental or material manifestations. It's the same things, the same elements, and depending on how you compose them, in which constitutions they arise, they become mental or they become material. And of course this picture is inspired by classical atomism. You have some kinds of building blocks and you put them together like in a Lego kind of way, and then you get something out of it. And the people like Ernst Mach, William James, also Bertrand Russell, or the neo-Russellian Dave Chalmers, who is very influential in consciousness studies today, they adhere in one or another way to this kind of compositional picture, which is classically, you can say it's inspired by the atomistic doctrine of classical physics. Now, on the other hand, the decompositional picture just does it the other way around. You don't start with individual building blocks, you start with one whole. Right? So, what you have to do now, if you have a whole, you can't compose it. It's already everything. You can only decompose it. And then when you decompose it, you get, this doesn't mean anything else than making distinctions, right? And one of the basic distinctions that you can make in this decompositional picture is the distinction into mental and material manifestations. It's like a kind of symmetry breaking, if you want to use physics terminology. And this is, of course, not inspired by classical atomism. This is really inspired by quantum non-locality, inseparability, holism, as well. All these notions. And the three representatives which you see here, who have at least partially tried to speculate, I'm saying speculate, about this kind of decompositional dual aspect thinking have been Wolfgang Pauli, together with the psychologist Jung, with whom he spent many years of discussion and conversation, further worked out by Hans Primas. Then we have the picture by David Bohm and Basil Hiley in London. And we have the picture that España sketched for us, essentially in his last two books. So that's what I will try to address now. And what I will do in the rest of this talk, the second half of it, is I first will give you the picture that can be distilled out of España's writings, compare it to the Pauli and Jung writings, and then I will come back to España, criticize some elements of the Pauli-Jung, and maybe these are interesting steps to develop the whole framework further. Okay, so here is. So in Bernard España's attempt to systematize the distinction between veiled and empirical reality, you can exactly find the general structure of decompositional dual aspect. You have one veiled, he uses different terms. Veiled reality, which is also sometimes called independent reality. Sometimes he uses the notion of veiled reality to address the whole framework. Sometimes he uses it to address just this hidden reality below the horizontal line. And he also uses the notion of the real, something that he calls the real, and the empirical reality above the horizontal line splits into the physical and into the mental. As you can see here in this quote, this something, he says, is something that is below the horizontal line in this picture, to which I gave the name which I thought neutral, independent reality, alias the real, is thus conceptually prior to the metaphysician. So you have to decompose it in order to get the dimensions of it here. In a theory of knowledge consistent with the veiled reality conception, independent reality, even though it may be considered the hidden source of our physical laws, in no way is what science investigates. What science deals with is to repeat empirical reality, to which the notion of a veil does not apply. Okay. This is from 2006 Physics and Philosophy, right? Yes. Let me get back. Some remarks to explain a little bit more in detail what he actually says in this quotation. So one thing he says is that the mental and the physical domains of empirical reality emanate from the same veiled reality. So he says the source of the physical laws sits there, down there. That's what he says. So it emanates from it. And the same for the mental. The real, this is something he says at another passage in the same book. The real is ultimately one whole, literally one whole. So it's really holistically conceived, which is, it's another quotation, absolutely inexpressible. If you have one whole, you don't have distinctions. If you don't have distinctions, you don't have categories. If you don't have categories, you can't talk, you can't communicate. So this is absolutely inexpressible. Quotation from the Neo-Platonist, I think. Then he says something additionally very interesting. He says efficient causation, as we use it in our scientific disciplines, causes precede effects, is instrumental only within empirical reality, in the mental or in the physical. Extended causation, that's a concept that he suggests. Extended causation describes influences of the real, of the independent reality, onto empirical reality. Let me again, I'll give you a little quotation here. Beyond Kantian-like causality, that's efficient causation, which takes place between the phenomena, there should exist an extended causality consisting of influences that are exerted by the real on phenomena and can be approached in any quantitative way. Again, it's completely out of our science. Return. Space, this is another thing which is really, I mean, this is almost like breathtaking. Space-time description that we use in sciences refers to empirical reality, not to the real. So it's, when you go down to the real, there's no space, there is no time. And of course, if there is no time, then there is no causation in the usual sense, because causation in the usual sense, as it is used in science, presupposes time insofar as causes have to precede effects in time. And the fifth point, this is a question which I pose to you, Michel. Does a pre-structure, if the real has a kind of pre-structure, does that somehow, how does that relate to the phenomenological approach? If there is something there before our minds arise, actually, then it can, of course, it has to be something that must be object to our experience in a completely different way than we see in our everyday lives, at least. And we may come back to that. Okay, so that was a very brief, how can I say, it's not a summary, it's just some glimpses of what Desponia suggests in his concept of the veiled reality. Now let me go to I don't talk a lot about David Bohm because that would take too much time away. So Bohm has the same picture, the same kind of remarks. But here's the what we now call the Pauli-Jung conjecture. This is, by the way, this is a reproduction of a painting by a German painter, Jürgen Baumann. And when we talk about what Pauli and C.G. Jung left, we are in a little more difficult situation than with Desponia, because Desponia wrote 2 comprehensive books in which he really gave us very detailed knowledge of how he looked at the world. In the case of Pauli and Jung, this was not the case. And most of the work that they did on this kind of dual aspect picture was between 1940 48 and 52, when Pauli had returned from Princeton to Switzerland, and finally became a Swiss citizen, which he was not because he was from that. This is a different story. Much of their picture developed in personal communication, in the correspondence. They wrote letters, and in unpublished material. So essentially, in this case, the difficulty has been really to reconstruct what they actually had in their minds from scattered remarks here and there. And that's what Hans Primas and myself have been doing for 15, 20 years. And then the result is something like this. So you have, again, you have an empirical reality above the horizontal line. They didn't speak about, they obviously used different terms: observed objects, material domain, conscious objects, mental domain. And but the idea that this whole picture is driven by quantum holism, of course, is visible here too, because that was the part that Pauli contributed, obviously. When Jung contributed, that's an interesting point, because Jung, as a psychologist, of course, developed something that has not been part of standard psychology up to his time. They call it the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious also has these features of an increasing amount of holism the deeper you go. And at the end of all of it, you come up with the notion that they not invented, they also took it from some Neoplatist scriptures, the notion of the unus mundus, one world, literally. It's a matter of question. And of course, for Jung, it was very important that the notion of the archetypes, as you may know, also sits below the horizontal line. The archetypes are ordering factors in the unconscious. And what do they order? They put order into the manifestations that emanate in the material and in the mental domain. So it's more or less the same idea. It's Despaliers' extended causality, right? The ordering. Again, let me read a little quote here. This is by Wolfgang Pauli. On the one hand, it's by Pauli, it's not by Jung. Remember that. On the one hand, the unconscious can only be made accessible in an indirect way. It's veiled by its ordering influence on conscious contents. On the other hand, every observation of the unconscious, that is, every attempt to make unconscious contents conscious, has a prima facie uncontrollable reaction back onto these unconscious contents themselves. As is well known, this precludes that the unconscious can be exhaustively brought to consciousness. The physicist will per analogy conclude that precisely this uncontrollable backlash, remember measurement, of the observing subject onto the unconscious limits the objective character of its reality and at the same time provides it with some subjectivity. The development of microphysics, he says that in 1954, the development of microphysics unmistakably led to the remarkable convergence of its description of nature with that of the new psychology. While the former, due to the fundamental situation known as complementarity, faces the impossibility to eliminate actions of observables by determinable corrections and must therefore in principle relinquish the objective registration of all physical phenomena. That's Wolfgang Pauli, it's not Jung. The latter could basically complement merely subjective psychology of consciousness by postulating the existence of an unconsciousness, if you want, of largely objective reality. Okay, again, some remarks. The unus mundus in this picture is, of course, the psychophysically neutral domain. It's the ontic, it's the really existing, it's what reality is all about. And it doesn't have a right-matter split. Mind and matter emerge as epistemic domains, aspects, dual aspects due to the decomposition of the holistic domain. Psychophysical correlations between the mental and the physical, between, if you want, between brain and mind, goes that far, reflect the lost holism, the broken symmetry of the unus mundus. Psychophysical events, that's very special and very detailed discussions by Pauli and you about what glues the psychophysical events together, how the correlations actually appear to us. They appear as meaning, as meaningful relationships. And of course, there is no direct causal relation between the mental and the physical. So that the brain does not cause the mind, or the mind does not cause the brain. That's, what did you say, bullshit? But there may be indirect influences. We can talk about this via the unconscious, via the unconscious. And the last point, the unus mundus is empirically inaccessible in principle, and that's again due to the fact that it's one whole without distinctions. The same argument as in Espanyol. Now you see here we have in the Pauli we have put a little bit of emphasis on the distinction between the ontic and the epistemic, right? Because we wanted to make the distinction clear between that which exists, the something that exists, and the other something which allows us epistemic access, the manifestations of the existing. 5 minutes, that's perfect, thank you. Now, discussing all these things with colleagues and with people from psychology, from philosophy in particular, we at some point we came to the conclusion that an overarching ontic epistemic distinction, which is just given once and for all, is just too simplistic. Why? Because we can describe, or we should allow us, I should say, to describe ontic and epistemic states, onticity and epistemicity, actually to every descriptive level. And that's a distinction which Primas first made in 1994. Then Bernard Espanyol amplified that kind of suggestion in a paper that he wrote for a Primas Festschrift in 1999. And then after that, we really, Espanyol gave us some very interesting insights into philosophical discussions about this. And we worked that out in a paper that we published in 2003, where we really made very good use of Espanyol's remarks. The idea here is well known in philosophy for a long time. 1969, Juin published his paper on ontological relativity. Then we have Van Fraassen, we have Putnam, we have Shibun, almost all the names that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, you see? They come up again. Now, what we developed in order to really instantiate, I could say, this idea that ontic and epistemic states can exist at every level of description that you want. There are many examples we could discuss. I postponed them to the discussion session because I want to finish this. So this picture of contextual emergence that is now used in many different areas of science is allows us a kind of self-consistent recursive definition of higher level properties in a hierarchy of descriptions. Higher level properties by lower level properties plus higher level contexts. If you only need the lower level properties, then you have a reductive picture. That's not what works. So we need something that is actually given at the higher level, can be implemented at the lower level, and together these things give us something that we can use to describe or to define higher level properties. Epistemic states can be ontologized, so we can use the description of the solid state physicist of an ice cube in order to say something about an ice cube which has nothing to do with statistical physics at all. For instance, what a barkeeper would say. The barkeeper uses ice cubes as ontological objects. He makes an ontological commitment to that level of description, and then in that sense he ontologizes states that would be highly epistemic for a statistical physicist or solid state physicist or whatever. And this is almost the last point, I would say. Yes. Last point. This repeats actually what I said before. There is no absolute context-free fundamental description. This was always very important for Hans Primas, I have to say, because he had a deep distaste for every fundamentalism, even in science, not only in society. And so he was, for a long time, he was always looking for arguments in which he can, based on the scientific discussion, rule out fundamental descriptions of fundamentalism, even in science. And then, of course, he was also under the influence of Paul Feyerabend. They were colleagues at the ETH at that time. And why does this absolutely context-free fundamental description not exist? The reason is that descriptions need distinctions, otherwise you cannot describe anything. And distinctions are always contextual. Once we ask a question, once we make a distinction, then we can develop a theory, and nature tells us in experiments whether the theory is right or wrong. But nature does not tell us what distinctions do.